Hello, today I'm going to be talking about the possible ideas, or how the new spawn system that's being tested could be actually used into the game. So as you can see, there is a limited number of tanks that they're adding, which is kind of a new big deal. You can see on the right side that they've only given a certain amount of each tank to be allowed to spawn. This is kind of whatever, but I'll get a little bit more into that in a little bit. But you're given random tanks. I came in here with an M18, and as you can see, I don't have any M18s to spawn with. Any decals or like decorations or silly camouflage sticks that you throw on your tank, or big pumpkins or whatever you throw on your tank, if you're using that tank that you put that stuff on, you can go ahead and it'll be on your tank. As you can see, it's using silver lions. You also get silver lions, of course, for doing stuff. But you also have an ace crew and spaded tanks. At least I believe they're spaded. It doesn't actually show a spade, but somebody says they're spaded. And I saw that they have like track armor for some reason, so I'm assuming they're spaded. Anyways, at the very least, they have repair, the tracked armor if the tank actually has it in game. It has the fire extinguisher, which is always helpful, and the replacement crew member, because George, while we don't like him, helps to have him around when Bob gets knocked out. So the potential uses would be to replace the current system, which I don't think would be the best idea. It would be could be used for future historical events that Gaijin does every now and again, like the World War II Chronicles that you did a little while ago, a couple months ago, whatever. It could be used in that context. It could also be used for enduring confrontations. I know many people have been wanting enduring confrontations. Like, ever since air enduring confrontations came out, they're like, oh, when do we get tank enduring confrontations? It could also be used for World War mode. We don't have a whole ton of information, so this admittedly is a bit of a stretch to talk about, but it is technically possible that we could see this system somehow used in World War mode. Alright, so jumping right into it. For the current system, there's no RP. You don't get any research points for what you're doing in this event. I believe this is mostly likely to be due to the fact that this is a test, or they're calling it a test. There's a leaderboard for system for some reason, but I think that's just because it's set up as an event. They didn't want to make anything special, and they probably didn't want to open up dev servers just for this. You can't pick your own vehicle, although you specifically need a tier 3, so like I said, I came in with an M18. I'm obviously not using an M18 right now. So if you're trying to get modules for your M18, that means you don't get any freaking RP for that M18, which like sucks. Try and get that fire extinguisher or George, even though he sucks, you can't get him. You get a randomized vehicle setup. I don't have any of these vehicles that I got set up with. Well, I mean, that's not true. I think I have like one of them. But I don't have this tank unlocked that I'm using. It requires freaking silver lions to jump into the game, which sucks. I mean, if you don't have the silver lions to jump into this game, you probably shouldn't be playing this high anyways, but that sucks. It would be better, probably, than the current spawn point system which we have for realistic battles. Which, if you play for realistic battles tanks, they have some weird system where you get spawn points for doing things, but it doesn't always make sense. Like, you get more points, spawn points for hitting a player 10 times rather than killing him straight off, because that makes sense for some reason. So as a replacement for that, while it wouldn't be the worst, it'd be very problematic for those who are really poor in silver lanes. Yeah, like I said, the fact that you need silver lines is really limiting for those that are really like poor. Because if you only have 5,000 silver lions, and you need like almost 4,000 to jump in this tank, and then you get killed immediately because a teammate was being a dick and was like, "Oh, I'm gonna kill Bob, because screw Bob, I'm a dick." Well, you're screwed now. You didn't even get to shoot anything, and you lost the civil lions right off the bat. That would suck so much. You'd have to go to reserves, and if you're like one of those people that doesn't like reserves, that sucks, man. I like reserves, but I know lots of people don't. That's whatever. I also have a surplus of silver lions, but at least at 500,000. I mean, that's not a whole ton, but for me, that's fine. I don't buy tanks every time that I unlock them. I don't buy planes every time I unlock them. So it would kind of help, but whatever. sometimes people do badly and they have long losing streaks, so they don't get a total ton of silver lions. It could be used to replace quantitative matchmaking, which I don't know what happened to that. I mean, I don't think anybody really knows with Sever Gaijin. They haven't said anything if something did specifically happen. How that was supposed to work, if I recall correctly, you'd have a limit of like 4, I believe, or something like that, of the highest tier tanks on each team. So you'd only have like 4 6.0 BR tanks, and they would be the top of the BR, but they would only be allowed to have 4. But each team would have supposed to have 4, I believe. So if quantitative matchmaking is working, it's definitely only one-sided. It's not making sure it's both-sided. It's because Q times. Which Gaijin should kind of stop looking at Q times like more matchmaker. But this could be used to replace that because it would limit people from bringing in those 6.0 tanks. Like, oh, you're only allowed to have 6.0 tanks. This sucks though if you're like me or some other people who sometimes only play games with one tank in their preset. Sometimes I'll go in there, I only want to play with my like Panzer IV for some reason, even though I don't like Panzer IVs. I'll say better example is the KV2. I like to jump into KV2 and sometimes just the KV2 by itself. And I usually get a couple kills. Sometimes I die, sometimes I don't. I don't have ammo in the freaking turret because I'm not a duck monkey. So I usually survive a lot longer than most other people in KV2s for some reason. But if I'm the highest tier, highest BR at 4.3, well, then that screws me because if the 4 other people already came in at 4.3 because they loaded in faster, then what am I supposed to do? I have to back out, but then I get crew locked. It's like, you can't really do that there. So that wouldn't really work so much for quantitative matchmaking as a replacement to quantitative matchmaking. So people that would do that would be completely screwed. They'd have to worry about the freaking crew locks, which sucks and needs to be relooked at. Redone. There we go. What else is there? You could limit the specific type of tanks at that BR. Like, say, 6 people bring in a heavy tank at 6.0, then you can limit to 3. And if 3 people have SPGs at 6.0, you can limit to 1. Because each tank does something different, and they do things differently. That could be dependent on role or something. But again, that's limiting to people who only bring one preset. And this is also limiting, especially to PS4 players. Because I know lots of PS4 players, they seem to come into the game a little bit late, even if they're like the first ones there, if that makes sense. For whatever reason, either due to Sony or Gaijin or just internet doesn't like cross-compatibility between the two. There we go. That wasn't so hard now, was it? Whatever the case may be, they don't seem to always spawn very quickly, and if you ever push around invisible tank, odds are it's probably a PS4 player. And then the PS4 players will get mad at whoever was pushing them because whatever, even though that person couldn't see you, but we won't talk about that. But yeah, that screws over PS4 players, especially because they seem to get screwed by that the most. So if they want to play their KV2 or Tiger 1, but they have 2 other tanks in their tree, well, now they can't screw the Tiger 1. You have to freaking play whatever else you brought in. And it's like, well, that sucks. Because I was trying to get modules for that Tiger 1, or whatever. Or I was trying to get George, even though he sucks. I don't know why I keep saying George. If your name's George, well, you probably don't suck. But this George does, whoever he is. Alright, so moving on to historical event. This, in my opinion, would be the greatest implementation for this setup for respawning. You could do it either to give accurate percentages of the vehicles used in the specific battles. How this would work would be like, we'll say Kursk, for example, because Kursk, I guess, for some reason that's in my mind. Say it's 100 T-34s versus 80 Panzer IVs. So for whatever reason, that's how it is. Then you can only have a maximum spawns of 80 Panzer IVs and 100 T-34s. Now this comes into balancing issues of well, you'd either have to have the German tanks, for example, be higher BRs, so because theoretically that would mean that they're better tanks. So theoretically, that would mean that lesser should be more, even though it's kind of dependent on player skill and depending on the map. German players are really bad sometimes, especially with different tanks because they don't know how to use their tanks, but that's another issue entirely. So that would come into issues with balancing. So the other way you could do it is just 100 Panzer IVs versus 100 T-34s. This wouldn't necessarily be as accurate historically, but it would make those historical events much more balanced. This would help the historical events be less one-sided in the queue times. If you see lots of events, one side will not almost always, but a lot of the time, to majority of the time, one side will have way more people queuing up compared to the other side. For this event, for example, it's an advanced Rhine. Its queue times are really high for the Germans and really low for the Americans. That's partly why I chose the Americans. Plus, I wanted to try and see if I could use one of the American tanks I haven't used yet, which I am. Which is nice, I guess, because I get to see how this thing actually works, and it works okay. What else is there? It would limit the use of what would be considered OP vehicles in the past. The way they've done these events is you would bring in, they would have a list of tanks, so it would be like Panzer IV-J, Panzer IV-G, and Tiger 1 versus T-34-76, T-34-85, and then KV-1. Or maybe IS-1 would be better than KV-1, but that's the point is whatever. So it would almost always be a bunch of Tiger 1s versus T-34-85s. I think in that lineup that's probably the better, more accurate of who would play what. So it'd always be the best vehicles of each team, and then if one side's stronger, say the German sides for whatever reason had King Tigers versus those 85 T-34s, or T-34-85s, then the King Tiger side would have way more people queuing up versus the Russian side, which would screw up queue times, which Gaijin doesn't like queue times for some reason, even though if they could fix it by fixing their matchmaking here, but this is a situation in which that would kind of help the queue times and be reasonable, because it would allow only a set amount of those OP vehicles to be used. So it'd be like a maximum of 10 Tiger 1s with the 80 other Panzer IVs, and 10 T-34-85s, and with the rest of the IS-1 and the T-34-85s, or 76s, whatever, being used on the other team. So that would help prevent and limit the use of what would be considered OP vehicles. This system, I just realized, could be griefed really badly, because if you are a dick, which lots of people are in video games for some dumb reason, I just realized this and I feel bad for saying this, but you could literally just spawn in a tank that's one of the higher level ones, like the Tiger, their King Tiger versus T-34-85s. You know, it's a terrible matchup entirely. At least in my opinion. And just spawn in that King Tiger and J out. Spawn in that King Tiger and J out. Spawn in that King Tiger and J out, because technically, if the RNG is on your side and gives you that random setup of a tank, how they're showing this in this Advanced Design setup event, then you could abuse that, and then that would be problematic. So now the Guardian has to look at that, because I just realized that's really terrible. And dang it. Anyways, so please, if you hear this, don't do that. That's a dick move. And then report people for being passive or something if you see that, if it becomes a thing. This would, in my opinion, minus that griefing thing which they would have to look at, would probably be the best way to make the historical events work. And it would be good too to help queue times, since I know they care so much about it, to have it similar to this system. You just need that one vehicle of that tier to join in. Not everybody has the King Tigers, but they might have a freaking, I don't know, what would be another tier 4, like a Panther D, I think it is. Or no, it'd be Panther A is the tier 4 one, I believe. It's either Panther A or Panther G. The point is they'd have that tier, but they wouldn't explicitly have that vehicle on that list. But now, because of the random tank assignments, well, now you can actually participate in that battle, and you don't have to have that specific vehicle, you just need to have that tier. That would help queue times, and that would help more people get into the games, and those events and all that jazz. It would be the greatest implementation of this system, in my opinion, so far. Next, we have Enduring Confrontation. Lots of people have been wanting this. I would enjoy it as well, because I like tanks a lot in this game. But if you've played air and during confrontation, you have to spawn in a similar way to this. You don't get random vehicles. You do get to use the ones that you bring in, but if your preset's empty, it'll throw in random vehicles in there, if I recall correctly, unless they changed it, which they might have, because they don't do RV and during confrontation all that often. But so if you have like a couple of, like, so you have your preset is, I don't know, say it's Russian because they have the weirdest BR disparity. Say you have the 3.7 Russian airplanes, but you don't have lower, but you have 3 of those in your preset of 6, then you would go in there and then Gaijin would randomly throw in the other 3 presets as the lower BRs that you would need for that event, or during confrontation. So this kind of works like that, except it gives you random vehicles instead of any ones that you get to choose. So it could work like that as well. You do need silver lines to participate, like in during confrontation. The biggest problem with the current how Ground Forces works in Warthunder is the matches wouldn't last very long. Matches that I played for the video were less than like 20 minutes. And during confrontation is supposed to be like an hour to 2 hours or something like that. And this wouldn't work with how the current map systems are set up. So the only way they can make during confrontation work for tanks is by introducing bigger maps or adding objectives for tankers to do. If you played during confrontation or just air in general, that is realistic battles anyways. Because arcade battles, they do have some of this, but it's a little bit different because you have to capture the airfields. Anyways, for realistic battles, for example, you have to destroy ground targets, you have to destroy bases, and then the airfield. You don't have this in tanks. You don't even have this in sim tanks anyways. You just have to kill each other or capture the objectives and hold them for long enough for the game to be out. That doesn't work. The only way to make this work is by making the tickets last longer. So instead of it being 10,000 tickets for each side, you'd have to make it like 100,000 tickets. Even then, you would end up, because these maps are so short, for whatever freaking reason, people would end up getting spawn camped. People get spawn camped as it is. How do you think it's going to be when these matches are an hour, 2 hours long? It's going to be ridiculous. So unless they make these maps bigger, and during confrontation can't really work. If they made bigger maps, sure. If they expanded maps to how they originally were, maybe, but they'd have to be bigger. Poland, for example, if I remember correctly, was a lot larger. Like, there's a lot more you could use of the fields. Now it's just really short, and they're just trying to throw you in that little city. And you have that little thing off to the side of the lake, which I hate, because people go there and they really shouldn't, for various reasons. But, yeah, so during confrontation, it could work, but they'd have to change a lot of things with ground forces before they could make it work. Lastly, we have World War mode. What we know about that is very limited, so this is kind of just way out there. It's a complete stretch, if I'm completely honest. The information we know of is a result of people data mining the patches, major and minor patches, looking for interesting stuff. Some of this included information about ships, like updated models and stuff like that. So just keep in mind that this video might be outdated really quickly or really later on, at least in context of World War mode. It could work if there's an overall like commander or whatever assigning specific vehicles to each battle. If you played Heroes and Generals, it works kind of like that. You have resources that you can spend to buy units of airborne infantry, tankers, and fighters, I think it is. So you would buy 10 sets of airborne and 100 sets of infantry and 10 sets of tanks and send them to attack this specific city. And then those teams that would be playing would only be able to use those resources. This would work only if that was the case, but we're not necessarily sure if that's going to necessarily be the case. We do have information that suggests there will be a commander, but I believe... Let me look at it really quickly. Alright, so it says armies. Controlled by clans, specifically the commanders. So there could be a commander, but if it's... Depending on what it means by armies, it would be like, say, the 82nd Airborne would be an army compared to Axis versus Allies. So it would probably be something like the 82nd Airborne would be used as by Commander George. Not George, we don't like him. Who do we have? Samuel, you're commander now. Alright, so Commander Samuel would be controlling whatever specific units that would be had. Apparently ammunition is important for these armies. So if Samuel doesn't use his ammunition properly, and the stuff that he gave to be used at, say, northern France was wasted because the people that he sent just kind of didn't know what they were doing with their King Tigers against those little freaking Shermans with the 75, then it's like useless. Doesn't matter how many things you could do. That's another thing. But yeah, it'd be dependent on the commanders to send, say, King Tigers, or this many King Tigers, or this many Tiger 1s, or this many Panzer 4s. That I don't like as much because it requires lots of micromanaging that I don't think they really want to have in this game. If they have something like that, it'll be very simple. It'll probably just be heavy tanks, SVGs, and all that jazz, which wouldn't really work with this random setup that they have currently in this Advanced Terrain. So fundamentally, that'd be cool to see this as a sort of like little light at the end of the tunnel for World War mode, but I don't think we're quite that far before we see anything more of World War mode. So to close, basically, this would really be the best for historical battles. It would work kind of okay with indirect confrontation if they made the maps better. They'd have to do a lot with it to make it work with random battles, and it could kind of work for World War mode, but we don't know enough to really say that anything definitively. But I think it would be great for freaking historical events. Like if they did in World War II Chronicles, it'd be perfect. If they did World War II Chronicles year-round, that'd be great. This system would work great with slight tweaks and giving of RP. It'd be amazing. So let me know what you think of these ideas. If you think something doesn't make sense, or you want more clarity on something, let me know in the comments. If you think something's better, or you think that this was just a dumb video, like there was no reason to talk about this, I guess you could say that. If you don't like the visuals or audio, that doesn't really help me right now because I can't really change that. But I'm looking for feedback on the actual content of the ideas. So yeah, let me know if you think these ideas are reasonable or they're too far stretched or whatever. Any information that I got, which is one link right now, will be in the description as a Google Doc. I also have my notes as a Google Doc as well. So I hope you all enjoyed it, and I hope you all have a good day.